Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another edition of A Piece of Cake with myself, Abdul Haqq, and our brother Abdurraheem, who you should know by now. And we are going to be looking at part two of last week's discussion, education or miseducation. And Abdurraheem, do you want to kickstart this today?
Well, I think we might as well, discuss with everyone the outline that I think we're going to try and follow. Who knows where it goes with our discussions. But what we want to talk about, brothers and sisters, and I hope that you're going to find this useful, inshallah. And we're going to be talking very much from our own personal experience. But we want to discuss, number one, mainstream education, our experience of sending our kids, and of course, our own personal experience of mainstream education. And then both of us actually have our own personal experience as well as our kids' experience of going to religious school, albeit not a Muslim one, but both you and me were in Catholic schools, right?
That's right.
But yeah, I mean, more relevantly, that's not a proper word, isn't it? Huh?
More relevant.
More poignantly, in respect to the mostly Muslim listeners, I guess, is that we're going to be talking about the attempts to Islamicize the comprehensive schools. So how did that go? Because there was a whole, attempt to do that. And then from there, we'll discuss Islamic schools. We've both had an experience of that as well. Even founding Islamic schools, Abdul Haqq, in your case, and then homeschooling as well. And then finally, the last thing that, if we have time to discuss, is hijrah, because that's something you have an experience of, which I don't, which is actually having your kids educated abroad. So first of all, in terms of, this may seem really obvious, bro, but maybe we could sort of dispatch this quite quickly. But obviously, we've talked about this last week. What are the main concerns that we have with the normal schooling system? Now, to put it in context, I still have kids who have just come out of school. I have two daughters who are going to be going back to sixth form college very soon. They should be starting, but they're a bit late to do that. So there's still going ahead in mainstream education, to be honest. So that's still happening with me, despite the worries. So what are our main worries? I'm sure the brothers and sisters might want to contribute, but what are your main concerns looking at the looking at the system these days, looking at what is being taught, looking at the atmosphere in the schools? What's your feeling, bro? And what's your own personal experience and your kids' experience?
I think that's a really good question, Abdurrahim, because as you know, coming back now, my last child, my 16th, 17th son. I haven't got 17 sons, I hasten to add. But
I'd like to meet them all one day. Why don't you just bring a whole lot down to my house?
But you bring yours.
It'll be so much fun. I'd love to see the whole lot.
29 all now. I'll up there.
Like the grandchildren, yeah.
And grandchildren as well, mashallah. My youngest is starting school. He started last Wednesday, actually, secondary school, year 9. It's his first experience of being in a state school ever. And it's a culture shock.
Wow.
And we're not in London, as you know. So that's the complete culture shock, and we're trying to help him understand and traverse particular cultural aspects, because he's always gone. He's been homeschooled. He's gone to school in Saudi. He's gone to school in Dubai. So now, coming back here, we're looking at the changes that have taken place societally, and we're bearing in mind that he's having to face those, and there are many caveats that he has to look at in what he's addressing with regard to the LGBTQ agenda and things that were not prominent before we left 20 years ago, things that were not prominent during our school era, Abdurraheem. So that's really, it's a concern. Sex education and everything is another thing that we're seeing that is on the agenda. It always has been, but that's been changed. Yeah, that's okay. That's been changed to actually meet today's dictates and claims. And one thing that I'm quite relieved about, in the letter that I received from the school very recently, is that we do have the option to opt out completely. And obviously, it's a foregone conclusion what we're going to do in that regard. But then again, Abdurraheem, what another aspect of concern I've got.
I mean, it's quite, sorry, just to interrupt there, bro. Just to interrupt as an interesting point, and let's not get too sidetracked, but we might, who knows, this is, you know, how it goes with us. It's very interesting that there's a lawyer, a whole group, I think a group of lawyers and some, you know, and some parents have actually filed a class action lawsuit against the government and the state schools for basically imposing the LBGT agenda in state schools unlawfully. It's actually, according to them, unlawful. I listened to a very, very interesting interview with the lady who's leading the whole class action lawsuit, which is quite a new thing apparently in UK. Saying it's totally illegal. It's an ideology. Schools are supposed to be free from ideological indoctrination. She broke the whole thing down and showed why it's totally illegal. So maybe schools are getting a bit frightened and getting a bit realizing that they're not compliant with the law and they could be in trouble. So, but anyway, good. That's good news. So, you know, you have the option to opt out.
Yeah, but also we're still looking, as you and I spoke about last week, at colonial backdrop to the curriculum. I believe that those colonial backdrops are, I think they're anti-black in some instances, but also they also target, I'd say, Abdurraheem, and I've been in quite recently on that. They also target white working class populations as well, because as you know, you better elaborate on this more than me. The education system was attuned to the masses, but then there was another aspect that was attuned to the elite. You would know that better than me, Abdurraheem, having been in that stream.
The elite get a separate, they get a apparently the same curriculum, apparently, but it's, you know, the I don't know, because I never went to a state school, but it's definitely different. I mean, certainly the intensity and the level of teaching, the way that you are taught, you have much smaller classrooms. So
and the trajectory, as you know, those who are going to Eton.
Well, I think the thing is, I think the trajectory, the whole system, right, is exactly what you said, Eurocentric, not even Eurocentric, very, you know, Anglocentric, yeah? Like it's an Anglocentric curriculum when it comes to almost everything, you know, whether it's history, geography. I mean, it's very interesting when we talk about Islamicizing a curriculum, right? You know, and how challenging it is. But the curriculum here is very, very Anglicized, right?
Yes.
It is like, even, you know, even when you're studying geography, you're studying things, you'll look at things that are English things, you know, British, part of the British Isles. So it's not just history, right? You know, when you're studying literature, you don't study Tolstoy, you don't study, you know, I Ching's, you know, whatever, or the Quran, or, you know, whatever, you know, Ibn Khaldun, or I don't know, you don't study any other literature, you study English literature, right? So it's extremely, you know, it's extremely narrow in its scope. And I think there have been some attempts to change that, to be fair. And I've seen changes in my kids, you know, in my kids' curriculum. It's definitely got a bit wider, and it's definitely got better. But I even think that it's still unavoidable that it's taught through a very white lens.
Yeah.
So that, and I think in a way, bro, that's much more challenging, isn't it? It's more challenging to deal with that in a way than it is to deal with issues such as LGBT, you know, and then the other obvious things, you know, how can you say it? The sexual culture, the culture of sex, the culture of drugs, the culture of music and entertainment, that is quite antithetical to our attempt to live a more pious, God-focused lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of the stuff, like music, for example. That was a big issue with my kids. My wife had a real battle with the headmaster in the school.
Right.
which I never would have thought. It was my wife didn't have, I never would have bothered, bro. I like, you know, it was for me. I mean, all credit to her. And, you know, she was on the internet pulling down articles and this and that and showing how within the traditional Islam, music is not considered to be allowed according to, you know, the what you can call traditional old, you know, Sunni orthodoxy.
That's
Music was basically almost universally considered to be, you know, haram, which, you know, she had to fight really hard to get the kids sort of withdrawn from that.
right.
And then there was all these subtle attempts to get the kids to go to church, you know, to go to Harvest Festival. And, you know, it was like, look, there's a difference between an educational visit that's actually educational and the kids participating in an actual act of worship.
Right.
There's always these things going on. But to be fair, the school by and large were, the schools were by and large, in my experience, you know, they were quite informative. They would let you know, they would tell you about what's happening, even though there was this subtle pressure to try and get your kids involved in everything. I mean, that's been my experience. So it's definitely a challenge. Now, I know you're listening, Abdul Haqq, because I want you to tune in and see what you got to say. But brothers and sisters, I think what is very interesting is how do you deal with all of that? Now, for many years, I had the idea or the belief that it's actually maybe better to send your kids to a state school. And the reason that I thought that is because if we are going to live in this society, and that's always been my intention is always to live here, to bring my kids up here, to build my family, to build my life here in the UK. And if your kids are going to be raised here and they're going to work here and they're going to live here, then they need to know, number one, what is the reality? And number two, they need to know how to deal with it. So the earlier they learn how to deal with it, the better. So it's almost like you throw them in the deep end. It's almost like old school, you know, you want to hear, you're going to learn how to swim now, chuck him in, you know, and yeah, swim, you know. It's almost like you have to do that. You know, you have to put your kids through that if they're going to survive it. And I think it's an interesting I think it's an interesting discussion that how Islamic schools can artificially isolate you, and then when kids come out of it, it's like they go wild. So what do you think? Should we move to that Islamic schools? What do you think, bro? Do you think? What do you agree with? What do you not? Do you agree with that idea that maybe they should go to state schools because that's the only way they can really prepare themselves for life in Britain?
That's a really good conversation to have, Abdurraheem, because when we were looking at starting a Muslim school in Brixton, and alhamdulillah, we've got that now, we quickly realized that not everyone is going to be able to afford or place their children in a Muslim school. So then we looked at the alternative that, okay, how can we positively impact state schools? So we spoke to parents, and I continue to say that, to join the school board of governors, get active in the school, see how you can shape. You mentioned the term Islamize the school, and we know that's quite difficult, but what about Islamizing aspects of the curriculum, making sure that there are historical, religious, cultural aspects that are there that are Islamic? Because we see that they are open, as you said, it's got a little better in that they're looking at all faiths and inclusivity around all faiths. But parents need to be integral to that. And we're not just talking about a handful of parents, we're talking about all parents that may be putting their children into state schools. So I agree with you in that instance, that we are here, we are British, we're part of this system. And there was that, you know, you've got the fiqh of minorities. There was that we had that as a perspective that was being looked at. But now what we're seeing, which I think is more emphatic, and I think it's what we should be looking at, is the fiqh of the jurisprudence of citizenship. We are
it's a whole new area.
Community. Exactly. So we don't have to be on the defensive in that regard. We need to be on the front foot. And as British citizens saying, right, this is our contribution, this is our participation, these are our objections. And I quickly say, wa alaikum salam to everyone who's salamed us, we haven't responded yet because we got so quickly into this. So for me, in the state school aspect, I do agree. And we're going through with our eyes wide open, Abdurraheem, because we know what infrastructure is, therefore we should know how to navigate or prepare to navigate
And
within
the
school system.
I think part of the problem is that there is a whole generation of Muslim parents who sent their kids to state school with no idea what their kids were experiencing because they never went through that system themselves.
Right.
And that was really, really problematic. But I think when you have a generation of parents who have been through it and they know what's going to happen, they can prepare. This is why one of the reasons, by the way, I'm so against, people marrying, for example, people from abroad and, getting a wife from Pakistan and bringing her here because, like, why? Number one, you got plenty of sisters here. Number two, like, she's not going to be ready to teach her kids for what's coming, right? Like, you need someone who's been through the grind of that state school system and come out the other side, alhamdulillah, Muslimah. That I think that's another, let alone the ethics of taking a person from the land of Muslims to this land. But that's a diversion. I think the other thing is, bro, the other aspect that I have always brought my kids up on is the dawah aspect. And I think it's been a lifesaver for my kids, right? Me and my wife have always inculcated into the kids, and I'm not talking about hardcore standing, in the playground, on a soap stand and turning it into speaker's corner, but always making them understand they are ambassadors for Islam. They have a responsibility. They should be telling their friends about Islam. They've got to display the best manners, the best grades, not because we really care what grades you get, because people need to see that Muslims are high achievers. They're good people who can, do stuff and to give a good impression because you're ambassadors for Islam. Right. And that is a game changer in terms of the kids' own self-confidence and their own mindset that they have, right? And it's sad to see that a lot of Muslims do not have and have not inculcated the dawah mindset into their kids. But brothers and sisters, I'll tell you, it is a game changer, right? For your kids' mindset, for their own self, what do they call it? Psychology, self-worth, their preservation, something psychology. Yeah. The way that you look at yourself, right? The way you see yourself in the world, right? Your self-image psychology. That's right. It's a game changer, right? It really is. We've talked about this many times before. So I think that there are actually huge advantages to, and I actually think one of the side things about what's going on in France right now is I think one of the reasons they don't want girls to wear jilbab, right? Or hijab or anything like that is simply because they don't want kids to get used to seeing people like that, right? They don't want to normalize it. They want to make sure that it's never normalized, right? Mm. Because imagine you're going to school, right? And in that school, you have friends who are girls who wear hijab, right? Who wear jilbab. Imagine how many girls are really super insecure about their bodies, right? Because of the whole propaganda that they're being,
objectification.
Yeah, and they can see that the hijab, the jilbab is a way out of that. It's a beautiful way to just cover yourself up. I don't need to expose myself to all of this nonsense, right? In other words, what they're trying to do is trying to take away this indirect dawah opportunity. They're trying to lessen it. They're trying to blunt the impact of that. I think that's part of the reason what's going on.
That comes down to, Abdurraheem, what I've looked at myself, where I've discussed with you before about ideological and behavioral extremism, and that the latter is subjective. So in France, they clearly see the abaya, the hijab, the niqab, and everything. They clearly see that as a behavioral extremism, which is wrong, because it's not in that respect.
I don't even think they know it's not perfectly well.
No, hold on, Abdurraheem. When you look at some of the writings and some of the conferences that I've looked at, they do that, and they're trying to push it in that direction. You're right. They don't believe in their hearts it's that, but for the reason that you've said, that the apparent nature.
Well, this is what they just claim, but it's
so
just
now it's a claim, but there's no impetus behind it or firm foundation behind it. That's right. But also remember, when we used to give dawah in Hyde Park, Leicester Square, going up and down, we used to say to our audiences, if you are not giving dawah is being given to you.
Yeah.
Psychologically, inadvertently. And it doesn't mean, as you said, you stand up on a soapbox and you speak, but we look at the annals of history with Islam, and we see that Islam spread partly by the sword, let's not deny that, but overwhelmingly as well, we see that it spread through the behavior and the manners and the etiquettes of the Muslims, in how they had that self-assurance, that self-identity, and were very comfortable about it when they were in alien lands, for example. Now we've got the opposite, that we've got children embarrassed about their identity. And it does come back to what you're saying, Abdurraheem. If we're not teaching our children to be ambassadors and to be comfortable with their own identity, then they're going to look at the predominant identity, which is what we're seeing now, okay? And they're going to want to emulate that. We know of stories, you and I have spoken to many mothers and fathers before, of young ladies, including young men, who, when they've left the house, they try to hide their identity. The girls will take their hijab off, and they get into their jeans, and they get into school and everything like this. And we've got to ask ourselves why that has taken place. So I feel that what what you've raised in this instance is very important about the Muslim identity, our children's identity. Again, coming back to the schooling, parents have got to really become familiar and involved with their children's education, as opposed to looking at that as an escape. My children, like those, the holidays here, you'll hear many parents like, I'm so glad that school has started back. I can get my children back to school. Okay. And we may feel that relief, but okay, but remember last week I said, if I said to you, right, Abdurraheem, would you send your child out knowing that there are all these predators and dangers and everything like that? And you say, all right then, Mariam, have a really nice day. See you when you get back. You say no. But the reality, as you said last week, some parents do that. And that's what we are witnessing. Parents really need to be prepared as their children are going into school. It's a very formative time for their children, and we need to be engaged, especially in the state school aspect. But you asked about the Islamic aspect. So therefore, yes, I do agree that if you put the children in the Muslim schools, there's two things there that happens in the Muslim schools. I'm going to call it out.
Can I just pause, because I want to give one example, because we did say we're going to talk from our experience. So I want to give a personal anecdote about giving your kids a dawah mindset. And here's a practical example. So when my kids were in primary school, so, you know, they was just about the age when they had to start praying 5 times a day, right? So at least, you know, that you encourage them to pray 5 times a day. And, you know, come winter, that, you know, those days are so short. So we used to let them join the Asr and Dhuhr. Yeah.
Yes.
But when winter came, the days are so short they couldn't get home in time. So I said, no, there's not an option for you to join your prayers. You're going to have to, you know, you're going to have to pray at school. And they asked the teachers for someone to pray, and they said, there's nowhere. You can't pray. I'm sorry, right? So I said to the kids, so I said, okay, tomorrow what you're going to do is, and I remember, because I know the layout of the school, I said, you know that bench in such and such place where the tree is there? I said, what you're going to do is you're going to meet there straight away after lunch. Yeah. I said, 2 of you, because there was 3 of them at school. I said, 2 of you are going to pray, right? And 1 of you is going to stand guard. Yeah. And then when you 2 are finished, then the other one will pray and you 2 will stand guard. Yeah. Okay. I said, that's what you're going to do. And you're going to pray right there. Yeah. Okay. And you're going to do that. So what happened is they did that the next day. Yeah.
Mashallah.
And then the next day after that, guess what? Some other Muslim kids came and joined them. Right. Guess what? 3 days after that, suddenly they found a place for the kids to pray.
Right. And so good. So you're bringing that example.
Suddenly they found a place for the kids to pray. You understand? Yeah.
And
I'm sure, again, the reason was not really anything, because it was like instigating. They were instigating a revolution, you know. So it was like,
that's a classic example, though. Like, for example, so you'll see, if there are Muslim teachers as well in state schools, they've got to show that presence. And the reason I think that's a really good example, because when I went into the education in the 90s, and I was a bilingual teaching assistant as I was moving from a legal profession, and I remember I needed to find somewhere to pray. It's a Catholic school, and everywhere I went to find somewhere to pray, there was the massive crucifix up there, and I thought, I can't pray here. I found one room to pray in on one occasion, and as I was praying, one of the senior staff came in and started talking to me and kept talking to me as I was praying. They wanted me to stop. I finished my prayer, And they stood there and said, "You can't pray here." So do you know what I did the next day, Abdurraheem? Because I knew there was some other children there with that. I prayed in the snow. I went out, threw the mat down, prayed, and the glass showed all the students could see what was going on. Straight away afterwards, like, no, we've got this space where you can come and pray. So
yeah, there you go. Yeah,
being on the front foot, and if there are teachers there, and if there are not teachers there, parents. If there are not teachers there, Abdurraheem's given a really good example. But imagine you as a parent coming in and saying, right, can we look at particular options? And then gathering other parents, and even non-Muslim parents might say, we're ready to support you on that. Not that we're needing their support necessarily, but parental perspective and parental rights, that's important. But Abdurraheem, I want to jump onto the main point of the question that you asked me as well, where you're saying, basically, in an Islamic school, there's one thing, and some are going to jump up and down when I say this. I saw, for example, that the standards in some schools were not the same because of the staff that they brought on did not have the required qualifications, experience to deliver. That was one thing. That's one thing.
That's definitely true, and I can vouch for that because
I noticed
I was a teacher in an Islamic school. And I had no teaching qualifications.
I wasn't pointing at you.
I was totally, bro. I was so lost. It was the hardest job I've ever done in my life, man. It was so hard.
I'm glad you admit that, because others wouldn't admit that, and then those like me who would criticize, and they would say, you want the child, you should be grateful that we've got a Muslim. Yeah, we've got a Muslim school, but we know that Allah khatab al-ihsan ala kulli shay. Allah prescribes perfection in everything, and we shouldn't be doing the substandard, okay, or the lower standards. We see that the spotlight is going to be on us a lot more from Ofsted and everything like that. So we therefore need to show Islam in its best and truest light in that instance. However, having said that as well, some parents may say this is a compromise that we are prepared to take because of the alternative of what's taking place in the non-Muslim schools, and I understand that as well. My initial statement is a call and a cry to those Muslim schools to ensure that the standards are not just, we shouldn't be just looking at Ofsted. Ofsted shouldn't matter to us in the sense that our standards are already high in everything that we're doing because of our moral compass, our ground, our standing. So when they come in and they see, oh my, wow, look at what they're doing, I think that's what should be the benchmark. Now, I was there at Islamia schools, working for Youth of Islam in these management for his school and some of his other businesses, and I saw the standards that were being pushed there, okay, and they were striving. There were some compromises, but it was the first school to receive state funding for education, alongside Faversham College for Girls in Bradford. There was one more school, I think it was Madani. My MBA dissertation, which Hassan's going to put the link for, that I did those as case studies, and I looked at our local school, Iqra, and asked, can we stay independent? Is it possible for a Muslim school to stay independent, reliant on the funds of the parents and the community? And in most instances, unfortunately, it's not. In those days, you get the voluntary status. So I'm not advocating against Muslim schools, but I'm saying if Muslims...
what in your opinion, I mean, my wife, we had the option to send, I've sent some of my kids to Muslim schools, and by and large, my experience of the school they went to was not a bad one. It was okay. Right. It wasn't the most outstanding education, but the problem was when the boys left the Muslim school and then went to state school, it was like they just lost it. But alhamdulillah, Allah guided them back to the right path. But I mean, I guess you could argue at least you've given them a good foundation. They may go a bit crazy, but at least you've laid the foundation really, really well. So I mean, I've had quite a few kids, but my wife, so from my first wife, my ex-wife, the kids, all of them went to Muslim schools, but from my wife now, none of them have gone to a Muslim school, right? And my wife has never been really impressed with Muslim schools for exactly the reasons that you stated, and also because I think she just feels they don't really prepare you for dealing with the world. And I think I'm not sure it was the right decision in retrospect necessarily, But I don't know. I mean, I think the standards of Muslim schools have gone up a lot, and I think some of them. In fact, to be fair, I was very interesting. So I was involved in one of the first jobs I had as a Muslim was working with something called Muslim Educational Services, which was started by someone who most of you probably have no idea who he is. His name is Sahib Mustaqim Blair. He's a German convert to Islam, married an English, Pakistani English girl, lady. And he was a journalist, and he worked really, really hard in pushing the agenda to get state funding for Muslim schools, right? And probably a lot of you don't realize and remember, but there was a really big pushback against this. But because he was a journalist, he really knew how to play the system, yeah? And basically his argument was Jews have state-funded faith schools.
Right.
Catholics have state-funded religious schools, right? Even there were some Rastafarians who had state-funded. Why are you not letting Muslims have state-funded religious schools? Why are they different? Under what basis? And obviously it was the same old thing: extremism, blah blah blah. This is in the day. This is even before 9/11. Yeah. So if you think it's a new thing post 9/11, no, right? No. There was that stuff going on before. All these excuses, right? But like any single one of them could have applied to any religious school. So he worked really, really hard, and he was definitely instrumental in getting the first state funded. I mean, it was still slow coming, and still probably still is. But the one of the reasons they did succeed is I think it was in Batley. The quality of the school was so good. Like literally, the girls there were getting it was A's and B's across the board, right? They were literally in the top 2% achievers in the country, which made it really hard to claim that, these girls are not getting a proper education, because they absolutely clearly were, right? Yeah. So I think to say that the standard of Muslim schools is bad, no. I think that it started off really good, and there always have been really, really good examples. But as you said, obviously, sometimes in the desperation just to start a Muslim school, sometimes the standards have just not been what they should have been.
And also, what reactionary is pointing out a very good thing there is that you see, when we're talking about Muslim school, we see that they start off Muslim and then they become cultural. And
someone's just said now.
That's reactionary. That's reaction point. So I think that's a very true statement. And then what you'll see for converts like me, my children, okay, some are half Pakistani, some are different backgrounds, that you see a microcosmic racism start to come inadvertently in some cases, because they're more used to the cultural aspects of the majority that are attending. The South Asian community are the most, and so we'll see that in that regard. You'll even see that in some of the Arab schools, if they're an Arabic school. So you've got those elements there that need to be spoken about, where the cultural aspect starts taking over from the religious aspect, or it's merged and you can't really see between it. And the ones you can see are the ones who are not from those particular communities. I think that's a challenge that is there in and of itself as well. I think that Muslim schools are a thing we should support. We should make sure that we're also supporting the pipeline of educated staff going in there as well. We need to make sure that's there. And we need to make sure that when we're teaching the curriculum, that the curriculum is preparing them holistically as ambassadors to go out into the world that they are living in. If they're learning religion in an abstract manner, okay, they're going to, as what you mentioned, our children will go maybe out into the world, into college, into university somewhere, and they see that what they've learned in an abstract perspective, it doesn't fit, and some of them will go off. Some of them may even become extreme in that instance in their understanding, in order to preserve abstract aspects of knowledge that they've learned. Alhamdulillah, I think one of the things we've got to look at as well, Abdurraheem, the children have to be prepared for the next step. So, mashallah, 2 of my children, I feel blessed. I've got a number of children who've graduated, but this week just gone, two of my children graduated from UEL, University of East London. I went to my son's graduation on Tuesday. My daughter then graduated on Thursday. Where did they get that basis from? They were raised in Saudi Arabia. They got that education. We move on to that when you're ready. But it still had to fit with the overarching Eurocentric curricula in order to be able to continue their education successfully and graduate with the subjects. So a number of my children have all graduated. Only one of my daughters, mashallah, studied university in Saudi. It was damn expensive. It was an elite university and everything, and it was twinned with one of the, I think, Princeton or one of those universities there.
Right. Yeah.
So what she saw there and what she came out with was a very strong degree. She's completing her master's just very recently. But you cannot ignore that if you want to achieve these academic qualifications within a Western societal context, that the schooling has to meet that line. It's got to go in that direction.
Yeah. But I think that's the way. I mean, anyway, that's an interesting discussion. Yeah. So I think, I guess, again, that is the thing about the Muslim schools. They are really, the bottom line is what they are is they're still following the same curriculum. They can tweak it here and there, but it's very limited, the flexibility. Basically, I think all you can do is have, all you've got time for is 14% of teaching is outside the curriculum. Yeah. So even if you want to create an Islamic school, you've got a 14% leeway, right? It's very, very little. And you can't really truly Islamicize the curriculum as it really should be. So, basically, what is it? I don't know. Is it worth it? Most of them you have to pay for. Most of them you're going to have to either pay fees, but it is partly supported by the state, or you have to pay fees completely. Now, the other thing that has been tried, so because we want to move on now, is what our brother Tahir Alim, mashallah, I still remember sitting with him having the discussion about what he wanted to do. And, like now, the conversation that he had with us would probably be considered, I don't know, some Islamist plot, but it was ridiculous. All it was, I remember him sitting down and said, why are we wasting our money and resources having Islamic schools, right? He said, basically, we have a system in place that parents, you have the parent governor system. So the system here is supposed to be that the people who decide the ethos and the rules in the school are the parents, and they are the governors. The parents are the governors. So the parents sit on the board. You select various parents. They sit on the board as governors, and that parent governor body actually has the most important say in how the school is run. Now that sounds like a great democratic system, right? But of course, democracy is just, it's just, they don't really believe in democracy. Yeah. They don't believe it one single little bit, as we've seen again and again. When democracy doesn't go the way they want it, suddenly they don't believe it anymore. Yeah. So he said, okay, well, what we should do is utilize this system, and where we have schools or we have massive Muslim majorities, and some schools, especially in Birmingham, had like 95% Muslims. He said, what we do is we train up the parents to be governors, right? And then as parent governors, they will dictate things that happen in the school. So we will have Jummah prayers. Yeah. We will have a prayer room. Yeah. We will have halal food, right? All of this is all within the framework of the legal framework of catering for the religious needs, yeah, of people in the school. It's all perfectly there. It's all within. It's not some strange thing. It's there in the law. It's supposed to be put there so that people can make sure that they're religious. And if the school has a massive majority of Muslims, why would it not have a hugely Muslim biased curriculum, right? But so this was done being very successfully until Michael Gove, right? Clearly him faked, or, someone under him faked this Trojan horse letter, right? And then basically there was a coordinated witch hunt with him, and you remember that huge fat guy Pickles, yeah, I mean, this was a proper, Christo-fascist, anti-Islamophobic. I mean, remember that Michael Gove wrote a book.
He had.
He wrote a book, an anti-Islamic book, and I think it was called The Muslim Trojan Horse. So how ironic, yeah. So, so this was basically, this was all totally upfront, totally legal, totally within the framework of what had been, developed by Labour under Tony Blair, right? That had all been developed. But under the Conservatives, of course, this was seen as whatever it is. Because there is a basically cohort of these sort of Christian, sort of right-wing Christian, Theresa May, Michael Gove, there's a few others of them. They're very closet. They don't come out as being Christian, but they clearly are. Right. Evangelizing Christians, but they don't never you never know it, right? So there's just the backhand tactics, because that's what they are, backhanded and backstabbing. So so basically this is what happened. So I mean, I'm just mentioning it because I think everyone needs to know about it. I think you need to know that you're dealing with, you can be dealing with some very, very unpleasant people who have an agenda and who don't mind ruining people's lives, by the way, because I personally know people whose, whole careers were demolished by that Trojan horse affair.
That's right.
Quite a number of really good Muslim teachers were slandered, baselessly slandered, accused of all sorts of things that were simply lies. Yeah. And ultimately, by the way, they were all exonerated by the school board. But it was too late because they'd all lost their jobs and had their careers destroyed. Yeah, this is how evil and malicious and wicked these people are. And it has to be said, that, this is another thing that needs to be, people need to wake up, because I am not saying in any way, shape or form that everybody in society is evil and wicked and malicious. Absolutely not. There are lots of, decent people who have good values in British society. Unfortunately, we don't always see it, and sometimes that's on the wane more than it is on the waxing, but unfortunately. But so it's good for us to know, because that is another dimension that we have to bear in mind, when we think about how we're going to educate our children, right? So that moves us on. Go on. Go on, bro. What have you got to say about that? Sorry,
no, it's good what you said, but that makes me look tangentially, only slightly, that we've got to be aware that there are Muslims within our communities who are with an agenda to dilute or remove Islamiyat from everything that's in the public space.
Are they actually Muslims, or you just mean hypocrites?
No, they say they're Muslims. We can't look into
their heart. What a hypocrite does. A hypocrite claims they're a Muslim, but really they conceal kufr and hatred for Islam in their heart. Why else would you want to remove Islam from people's lives, unless you were just a munafiq?
I'll give you an example. Something's just resurfaced recently around Green Lane Mosque. The 2.2 million that was allocated from the government has now been frozen. And that's because of an organization. I read it today and I shared it with one of the main, Abu Osama, you know him well, mashallah. I shared the article with him. And basically you've got an entity, and there was someone on X, formerly known as Twitter, pumping stuff out, raising it with the government. He calls himself, herself, whatever, Habibi, and mentioning stuff that was downright, I'm going to say, disbelief in the sense of what was being espoused. Because it was talking and saying, look at Green Lane, and it gave excerpts of statements of Abu Osama and other leaders who were bringing statements, but also saying that basically going against Wahhabism, as they call it, that they're pushing hadith and they're pushing statements of scholars, and they don't stick with just the Quran. And how can we allow such Muslims to move?
Oh, this Hajri guy, this Hajri. There's this guy Hajri, something Dr. something Hajri, just spouts that Quranic nonsense that he
from the Quran, and basically now because that's got the Department of Education or the MPs in a bit of a hoo-ha tiz about it. They've frozen what was going to be a very good project to build a state-of-the-art youth element. They liked what Green Lane was doing. And we're still talking about education. So the point that I'm making is that You've got those.
Well, I heard someone say someone suggested the whole thing was a setup anyway. The whole thing, they were just passing.
That's what I was thinking. You know what? When I spoke with
when are we going to learn?
He said the same thing. He said the same thing. Right, take them down that path, get them to drink the water, and then start throwing because that damages them more than anything else.
Yeah.
So that's taking place. But Abdurraheem, we do have that, and yes, we have different streams of Muslims. We have, and that's fair enough to an extent. I'm not talking from an ideological perspective, but when we have Muslims undoing Muslim progress, okay, and we've seen that throughout the decades being Muslims here. When you see that, especially in the education system, okay, it's even more nefarious. Because parents don't
I mean, bro, that's as old as the hills, bro, isn't it? You use a local to subdue the locals. Whether it was the US, military employing Indians to fight Indians, or I mean, it's just the old Byzantine divide and rule. It's as old as the hills, bro, isn't it? Use a native to subdue the natives, bro. There's nothing like it, is it? Because they know their people. So
exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, bro, look, that's a very interesting point. So I think the other thing, let's touch upon it briefly. I think we talked about it quite a lot. So I haven't sent my kids to one of those schools that is, a state school that is majority Muslim. So did you send any kids to one of those types of schools?
Yeah, no. So I wrote about it. So you've got an Islamic school. And you've got, so is it a school for Muslims or a school with
normal
Muslims?
Comprehensive school, but with a board of governors that are all Muslim, because the parents are all Muslims. So on the board are all Muslim parents, and then they decide what are the main sort of, we're going to have halal meat in the school, and we're going to have a prayer room, and we're going to have, we're going to have Eid assembly. We'll have a day off for Eid, because that's all the sort of things that Muslim parents can actually decide. They can decide that stuff about the school, right? So anyway, I'm
unfamiliar with that. I'm unfamiliar with that from a personal perspective. But I would go back and throw that question out there: Is that appetite still there from parents after what we saw with the Trojan horse?
Well, I mean, that's the point. But I think, inshallah, you don't give up. You have to keep going. Because at the end of the day, I mean, I think the people who really suffered were the teachers, because obviously they employed Muslim teachers. They got Muslim teachers on board, right? And all you need is a disgruntled, evangelical Christian teacher who's been put in there to try and evangelize to the Muslim kids, because that's having taken place, and get together with the, other closet evangelicals in the government to slander the Muslims and claim they're doing this and that. Was just lies, because that's pretty much what happened. But I don't think we should give up.
No,
I don't think Christianity is dying, and alhamdulillah, Islam is on the rise. So it's just a setback, and it's really sad to see awesome people being taken down. But we just have to get back up and work even harder at it. It's all legal. It's all within the framework of the law. The whole system's been designed theoretically so that you can do that. It's just the hatred of some individuals. I don't even think it's everybody. I think there's lots of people. Apparently there were even non-Muslims who wanted to send their kids to these Muslim governor schools because they were so good.
Right.
Because everything was so good. The quality of the education was so good. There was less harassment. There was less drugs. There was less, sexual predatory behavior. So it was becoming popular even with the non-Muslims. They wanted to send their kids to those places. So they don't like that, bro. They hate it when there's a Muslim success story. Bro, they just want to bring it down. As Allah says in the Quran. It's all there in the Quran. It's not like news, For anyone who reads the book of Allah and understands what it says, will say, that we know that this is what Allah said is going to happen. So anyway, bro, let's move on to homeschooling. Now, both of us have had homeschooling experience. I think we talked about it a lot last week. But what's your experience of homeschooling the kids, and how did you go about it? What did you do? Interestingly, again, just as a side point, when I was working
right.
for Muslim Educational Services, I was in charge of writing a homeschooling curriculum, an Islamic homeschooling curriculum. That was actually my main job, so which was quite interesting. So Sahib Mustaqim, may Allah bless him, and I don't know, I haven't heard from him for ages. You know, he was really working hard on that. MashaAllah, prepared me for the future. But yeah, what's your experience, bro, of homeschooling?
I think on the whole, even when we were abroad, and some of my daughters opted to be homeschooled and self-study, I feel that that is more aligned in equipping students, children, for the real world, because their learning, their education is integrated with the everyday life.
Yeah.
Okay, everyday life, and that's how it used to be pre-industrial revolution, as you know. That we spoke about that.
So I just want to, bro, I just want to interject here, because last week, so I want to raise this again. Last week, someone said, well, how does homeschooling reflect real life? Yeah. But it really does, because it's exactly what you said. Number one, your studying is integrated into your everyday life, which is what you have to do when you work anyway. And I think the other thing that's really important is you are self-studying. A lot of it is you have to learn how to learn yourself,
right.
which is basically more or less what you have to do in the big wide world, right?
And yeah, for my children, for my daughters, for example, when they then went to university, and they were with their peers, they came back and they said, Abby, we realized how more mature we were than our peers who were coming into university, and we were like, how old are you? And I said, why? And they said, we've realized that what we were doing with self-study, home study, my wife, the educationist, so that she worked remarkably well with them, was something that really prepared them. The boys, it was slightly different. The boys that were hardwired different. They needed to be in school, so they were going to schools after a period of home study in Saudi, and we saw that wasn't really working for them. But for my daughters, and the way that they excelled, and a number of them got their degrees and their master's degrees and everything now. For me, the home study aspect, and they opted, this is the interesting thing, Abdurraheem, more of the girls opted for it, saying that whilst they didn't mind school, they saw some of the, I think, the microaggressions that were taking place against them. I didn't witness any racism while I was abroad, but my daughters and children, who are different shades, mashallah, because of their mothers, they did witness that on micro levels, but they felt, we want to be in an environment that we know that accommodates us completely. The one thing that they appreciated in the Muslim countries was that their identity as Muslims were not under any question or any doubt at all. And that was an important thing, as you said, about that self-worth and the growth and everything. They didn't have to worry about that.
I mean, I think
the problem of racism coming from fellow Arabs, or from Arabs, fellow Muslims, should I say? But they were going to face that if they came to if they were in the UK. But it equipped them with a maturity and a foresight as third culture kids, as third culture children, more than it would have done had they been in school, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, I want to, I personally, I would like to do a little bit of evangelizing for homeschooling. I'm a big fan of it, but I'm going to reiterate what we said last week. Homeschooling does not mean replicating the classroom at home. Yeah, that is just so sad to do that, right? But what I mean is homeschooling. Let me tell you about the amazing opportunities. What some of the beautiful things about homeschooling. Yeah. Number one, the kids can learn whenever, right? Like, it's not actually healthy for teenagers to be getting out of bed, and going to school at 8. They need to sleep. Actually, teenagers, they actually need to sleep. Physically, they need to sleep. That's not one good thing about homeschooling, is that the kids can sleep a bit more, right? And believe me, they're so much healthier and better for that, and less grumpy. I'm sure a lot of teenage problems just caused by the fact they don't get enough sleep. Number two is, and I'm not talking about the stuff we all know, right? I'm not going to talk about all the sex, drugs, and rock and roll. No, I'm just talking about the positive things that you can do with your kids, right? So here's the other thing, is that if you want to go on holiday for a week, no one is going to stop you. You want to go on holiday for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, you want to make a trip somewhere, no one can stop you. You can go whenever you like. You can go and make a trip and make a holiday because you build the curriculum and you build it for yourself. That's really important. Number two, even within UK, for example, you take your kids on trips. Now, one of the things that really incenses me about the state education and the direction it's going is that they are literally requisitioning the role of parents increasingly. They are doing things like they sit and watch movies with the kids. They take the kids to Alton Towers. They take them out for these trips. Like, wait a minute, this is what parents should be doing with their kids, yeah? Not the school, right? And for me, it's a sort of, it's like grooming, yeah? It sounds like grooming, right? It's almost like they're trying to, no, we're your friends, this and that. Anyway, I can't really, literally, it's like they behave like they are the parents. Like they did not give birth to our kids. They did not give birth to them, right? Anyway, that just really gets my goat when I think about it, the way they think that somehow they have more rights than the parents, right? Which is the way it's heading. But the great thing about homeschooling is you get to do things like that with your kids, right? And I mean, unless you're just a lazy git who couldn't be bothered to do stuff like that, then you've got no business homeschooling your kids anyway. But people who really care about their kids and really care about their education and really care about their personal growth, these are some of the things, and you can choose activities for your kids that they would never be able to do at school. So one of my sons, he really got into mountain biking. He ended up racing mountain bikes, did quite well, mashallah. Even one of my daughters did for a bit as well. She even raced a few World Cups, which is like flipping insane, right? But anyway, that she was quite young. She was still a junior when she was doing that. But but subhanallah, like you could never do stuff like that. I mean, you could, of course you can, but it's just not going to be as easy as when you're homeschooling. So, and I'm just giving an example, like many, many other things that you could do. Horse riding, archery, all sorts of things that you can do with your kids, right? Which you could do anyway, but you just got much more space to do that when you're homeschooling. So, I could go on and on and on. I think it's brilliant. I think homeschooling is amazing. The best thing is you get to spend time with your kids, and you never get that time back. You're never going to get that time back.
That's what you said. I concur. All of that. My children were doing horse riding regularly. They had a tailored curriculum in that regard, and they really loved that particular aspect. I think it was Jenna said yes, they're seeing the problem with the teacher in the teenagers. The comment just came up is sleep deprivation, basically. So I agree with you around that. But also, Abdurraheem, what we saw, and it actually happened, when you look at the curriculum and how it's set up in schools, and you take the curricula from a homeschooling perspective. Like my children finished the GCSE curriculum for English in 2 months, in 3 months, respectively.
Yeah. My kids have done that as well. Yeah.
Instead of that nine month, you've got to. So it's like, okay, you're going to do these three subjects. Do these 3 subjects for 3 months. You finish the curriculum. What other ones do you want to do? 3 months, finish the curriculum. So
that's what my kids have just done. Literally, my kids just did that, bro. I think they did in 1 term. They did 2 years worth of studying.
Exactly. So you can do it. I'm going to flip it because they're going to be those.
And that's just doing 2 hours a day. Tutoring 2 hours a day plus homework.
Exactly. So we've both done that. So for me now, that I'm going to flip it because I know, and I've heard this from parents before, and they've said, look, Abdul Haqq, not everyone, and sisters have said it, not all of us are capable of homeschooling, and I do appreciate that, and I'm talking about some who are really challenged financially.
That's true. Yeah, very true. Yeah,
and even their own education, you could say bring in tutors, but they can't sustain that because of the payments. We've got to bear that in mind. But do you know what, Abdurraheem? Like we spoke about abroad. One of the things that I tried to do didn't take off is to say, okay, those who couldn't afford and those who could afford, to have a sort of tiered system that was there. So I'd say, okay, parents who can't afford, let's have a small group, and those parents will help in whatever particular way they could. It might not be academically, it might just be administratively. Do you understand what I'm saying? And that will give concessions to their child to be taking part. Those who are parents who are working and saying, no, we love this, but we haven't got time, they would pay a little bit more money. So then the whole system works. The whole system work. That's okay. So I think we do have to take into consideration those who don't have the abilities. Not all mothers, fathers have that ability to teach. That's
absolutely.
One. And so that is
and
a challenge.
And not all kids are going to get on with homeschooling. And I think that, you know, I like what you said earlier, is that, you know, your daughters chose what they felt comfortable with. And that's always been with the case with my kids. The option has always been there for them. It's always like, if you really want to go to school, you know, it's just like, try this out for a bit. If you really want to go to school. I mean, 2 of my daughters are going back to school. Anyway, they did homeschooling for a bit. Now they're going back. It was, to be honest, it was like I said last time, COVID. Anyway, let's not repeat. So finally, the Jazakallah khair for that, bro. Nothing. I just want to say one word of encouragement. Yeah, is that I totally agree with you. Absolutely not everyone can hack it. I think it's a lot easier than you think it is, brothers and sisters, especially when you let the kids learn how to learn themselves, right? It's not like you have to be a teacher. You don't need to be a teacher, right? You need to trust the fact that your kids can learn themselves. And one thing I have to say is the resources available these days are absolutely outstanding. There are just amazing resources available, right? Kids can learn so much stuff. There are online courses. Just go through it. They're literally online courses. They just go through it. They do a lesson or 2 a day, and it just takes them through. It's just there, right? And the amount of stuff that is available is absolutely incredible. My son, he's only 13, taught himself to program C++, right? All online. That's all he did. He just did a couple of lessons a day. That's it. Taught himself. And, you know, now he's actually got a job. Like, it's an internship. It's not an actual job, but it's a start, right?
Right.
Developing some program, right? So, I mean, you know, like, I'm just saying that because, you know, the opportunities are so many these days. It's really incredible, right? Maybe there's an agenda, right? And I did hear someone raise this, is that, you know, the likes of Bill Gates want to push homeschooling and want to destroy schools because the whole learning from a computer thing is going to make him money, you know, through Microsoft and his learning platforms that he's got. That's a discussion for another time. Abdul Haqq, bro, I want to go on to one final thing. I'm going to throw it to you now, which I have no experience of. But hijrah, obviously I have experience of it from the point of view of all of us must have thought about leaving these lands, just giving up on it, and like, I'm going to go and live in a Muslim country. I just heard an Instagram short just today. A guy said, I'm living in a Muslim land. You know, whenever I hear the adhan, I just go to the mosque. I could pray everywhere. I never have to worry about saying my prayers. You know, my kids, my daughter wears hijab, my wife wears hijab, never has to worry about it. It's just, and, you know, like, he just was waxing lyrical about how much he liked it. But how about education, bro? What is your experience? Although I suppose you haven't made hijrah because you come back to UK, but I mean, in all intents and purposes, you were living abroad for a long, long time. So it's almost equivalent.
That's right. Well, Hassan's living abroad still as well, mashallah, who's in the background. But yeah. What you read from this individual, that's there. The beauty of living in a Muslim country. There are changes there, actually, because we're seeing a lot of our children who, and there are challenges that, because the hijab is not such a feature anymore, that you're seeing the culture there shifting away from that. I've witnessed that. There are challenges with our children in that respect and everything as well. In some countries, Saudi, the adhan is no longer prominent there. It's switched off or whatever, and you don't hear the Iqama anymore. You don't hear the prayer coming out on the microphones. That happened while I was there. So we've got to put things in context. But that being said, being in a Muslim land and the freedom to move about as a Muslim, and the tranquility and the safety that's there is amazing. Now, the schools can be hit and miss. And I'm going to be frank. Remember, I've been involved in education in Saudi for the last 20 years. I've run schools. I've started schools. I've changed. And what I've seen is that sometimes you have to put your children in the best of a bad bunch. And unfortunately, what we were seeing the majority of schools is that they were trying to follow and emulate the West. And in them trying to follow and emulate the West, we were seeing the standards were predominantly and continue to be predominantly Western, especially when we look in countries like UAE, okay, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Sharjah. You have some of the more religious attuned schools and curricular schools, but you do have that Western backdrop that is pervasive across most of the schools and the standards that are actually there. You can get a good education. In some of the schools, you will be paying for them. None of the schools are free, unless it's the Saudi state schools and everything. And even the Saudis take themselves out. The Emiratis take themselves out of their children out of those schools to put them into international schools because they see the standards as being higher in that regard. But again, there's that Western-facing, overarching curriculum that is the standard that they drive towards. Can your children do well in there? Yes. There are brothers who are abroad at the moment. You know some of them, Abdurraheem, very well. And their children have done very, very well. Again, bringing them, after they've finished at a particular level, however, they come back to the West and go into very good universities. So that's what, again, they're Western pointing. They're Western pointing.
Thank you, bro. Jazakallah khair, bro. So, I mean, obviously, I don't think we need to, extol the virtues of hijrah. It's pretty obvious. I'm sure everyone's thought about, nothing's perfect. Yeah. No. Nothing is perfect. But there are definitely some upsides to going to a Muslim country. So, mashallah, I think the only thing my last word tonight is that, look, guys, if you want to give your kids a good education, whether you homeschool or not, even as a parent, if you really want them to do well, you are going to have to put effort into your kids. Yeah. You can't just sit back as a parent and just hope for the best and, think that they're going to learn at school. It's not going to happen, right? Like most of the kids who are really successful at school are successful because their parents have a huge amount of input into their education. So even if you decide, homeschooling's not for you, you still have to put a lot of effort into helping and supporting your kids in order for them to really achieve well academically. So it's always there, brothers and sisters. That's just what raising kids is all about, I guess. We want the best for them, inshallah. I guess that my final word is, don't forget that the most important knowledge is the knowledge of the Book of Allah and the way of our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And sometimes it's so easy to get caught up in maths, chemistry, biology, history, and French, all languages. Yeah, we forget about what really is knowledge, what really is ilm. Right. Real knowledge is qala Allah wa qala Rasul. Allah says and the Prophet says. That's the real knowledge, because at the end of the day, brothers and sisters, nothing else is going to matter. You can't wave your degree in front of Allah on the Day of Judgment and say, look, I've got this. Yeah, that's not going to mean anything to Allah, right? What's going to be really important is, what's your heart like? Have you worshipped Him? Have you obeyed Allah? Did you worship Him alone? So that's the final thought, brothers and sisters. From me.
Right. No, thank you. I think that's really important. And my final words are just as concise as yours. But just on the end of yours, my wife, mashallah, was one of the founders of the school in South London, Iqra. To endorse what Abdurraheem said, the motto of that school, even today, it remains, is training for this life and the hereafter.
Yeah.
But I would say my final word would be this: that if your children are young and you are able to go abroad, I did a hijrah of the heart, not of the body. I always went out there to work with them. If you're able to take your children out and let them study and grow at home or in the schools over there, protect them from the ideology that's being pushed in this society at the moment. And then when they get older and are more cognizant, you come back. If you have a plan like that, I took a career break from the Department for Education, 2 years, then 5 years, and I said, I'm staying. While there are still challenges here, my 14-year-old is going into school for the first time now, and I'm okay with that, because 14 years of living abroad in a Muslim land has prepared him and my other children who since came back, and they can see very widely, very clearly, unequivocally what they have got of the challenges there. And it's for them to navigate that now. So if you have that opportunity, the Muslim countries are not being affected. There's a push, but it's not in the curricula of any of the schools that I know across the UAE and Saudi, and I've been involved in education there for the past 20 years. So if you can do that, and your children are young, the formative stages, do that.
It's
If
worth
not,
trying.
as Rahim has said, we need to be proactive in engaging with our children, whether they're homeschooled or they're not. And
Absolutely.
there.
I think, brothers and sisters, sorry, my final word was not my final word because I couldn't resist. You always do this to me, Abdul Haqq, yeah. No, but I do want to say, brothers and sisters, I think this has possibly been one of our most beneficial podcasts that we've done. Yeah. And I mean, in the sense that it is the benefit is so wide ranging. And I know there's a lot of parents out there who might really just benefit from listening to this conversation and having a good, it will just at least give, like we've presented lots of options, lots for you to think about. So why not share this, podcast and with people you think might benefit from it, inshallah. Anyway, from me, Abdurraheem Green, and from my dear brother, Dr. Abdul Haqq Baker, until next week, inshallah, we'll be back next week, I hope. From me, Abdurraheem, it's Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. And from Dr. B,
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Jazakallah khair.
Barakallah fiik. Salam.